Hello, everybody, and welcome to another RevOps Co-op digital event. We are here to talk growth AI trends and strategies for revenue operations in the AI and ML era, which we are all fortunate enough to currently be living in and living through. And we have a couple of expert panelists with us today that are going to be diving into this topic, sharing some stories, sharing some tactics and some things that can help people in revenue operations on their growth AI journey. I have Stephanie Martin, who is the VP of Revenue Operations over at xfactor.io, and Jake Goldfield, who is an operating partner over at Permira. And Stephanie, I'm going to actually turn it over to you so that you can kick us off, add anything to those introductions, and also start to share some slides and walk us through the content.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. As Matt said, I am Stephanie Martin, and I lead go-to-market and revenue operations for xfactor.io. I've been in RevOps for approximately the last 18 years. My own curiosity started to peak about a year and a half ago about how AI was going to start to transform my life and my work life and my day-to-day tasks. Now I'm excited to be part of xfactor.io and helping organizations to get out of the growth guess gap. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more on the slides, what that means. Excited to be here today with Jake Goldfield as my co-host. We're excited to get into why AI is going to really transform revenue operations. So, Jake.
Yes, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Stephanie, really nice to be on here with you and with you, Matt. My background, I'm about 2 decades now in the RevOps, sales FP&A, go-to-market world. The experience spans startups. I was part of Yammer, which ended up being acquired by Microsoft, part of SurveyMonkey. I've also been part of some scaled out operations. I was part of Meraki as they became part of Cisco and then scaled to multi-billion dollar revenue, as well as helping start and build out Google Cloud's security product group. In the last 5 years, I've been involved in private equity as part of SalesLoft, which is owned by Vista Equity, and now I'm an operating go-to-market lead at Permira. So, I think from an AI standpoint, I've been very, very interested in how that creates more efficiency and more productivity for sales teams, but not losing sight of the actual mission of go-to-market and what we're all here to do. So looking forward to today.
Okay, well, let's get started. Let me figure out how I can advance my slides. Here we go. So just a quick rundown of the agenda to set the table for what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about growth first as the primary initiative that many of us are trying to achieve, and how RevOps then becomes the growth system for that. And I think we all know this, but we're going to go through our point of view on this, and then address the challenges that we're facing, and then why we think that AI and ML is really going to be the future of modern RevOps and how that's going to come into play in various different ways. So let's get started with the growth topic, and I'm going to turn that one over to Jake to get us going.
Yeah, we thought a great way to start is to just look at metrics and look at leading indicators that I found very important throughout my career, but also things that we look at inside the private equity firm I'm a part of today, that I've looked at in the past, and so forth. And I think this is important because it helps ground us a little bit in terms of like, what are the systems, what's the tech, how do we support ourselves around this? So the first thing I'd say when we think about growth, a lot of companies focus on sales and marketing efficiency ultimately. Like how effectively can you create the next dollar of bookings, or how effectively can you create your bookings? But that's a really tough metric to just look at and change or impact. So there's a lot of underlying metrics there that are kind of intertwined. And when I think about these sets of metrics and these definitions, there's three focus areas. The first is like, are we operating effectively? Are we operating efficiently? The second is the go-to-market set up for efficient growth? So like, is the design strong? And then three, of course, like, are we going to achieve our target? Are we going to hit our numbers? Are we going to grow? And then within that, there's a bunch of metrics on here, but I think it's just to call out a few. Rep productivity, of course, is just core to being profitable. You need to be over a certain amount from a productivity standpoint to support overhead, to support SDRs, to support all these other teams. So that's kind of a core one. Within that, you have attainment. Is your team achieving? How much of your team is achieving? Are those salary dollars being put to work correctly? Because if you're not hitting quota, you're just paying salary. Are you winning against competition? Are you qualifying in well? And then in terms of efficiency, you're looking at things like, well, how well are you spending your commission dollars? Do you have the quota capacity do you need to hit the plan? And then around achieving, we look at things like pipe coverage, your ramped sales rep standpoint. Like, are you able to retain reps and what percentage of your team is actually ramped up? When you look at things like this, like rep productivity, bookings per head, win rate, and coverage, like pipe coverage, those are all interlinked. And I think in my past, I've had a lot of siloed conversations. Like, let's talk about rep productivity today. And then tomorrow, I'm going to talk to a different team, like the strategy or the marketing team, about win rate and competitive win rate. And then 2 days later, I'm with the VP of sales about pipeline coverage. But the reality is they're all interlinked, right? Like you're not going to get the rep productivity you need if you don't have the coverage and the win rate that you need. You're not going to get the win rate you need if you don't have the right content that you need from marketing and the right strategy and so forth. So like being able to look at these real time and talk about them together is really, really important. The other thing I'll say is when we think about growth and profitability, there's this concept of the rule of 40 that we've all heard about or potentially have, which is really what is your ARR, generally ARR growth rate, which is a percentage, and then what is your EBITDA margin, earnings before taxes and depreciation, but effectively a measure of profitability. And together, you kind of want those two metrics to be 40 or above. And like traditionally, that gives you a much higher valuation than if it's below. I think a couple notes that first, growth is still the most important thing. So if you can get more growth, that's generally worth 2 to 3 times a point of profitability. And there's a great Bessemer kind of, they call it the rule of X study that came out that you can take a look at. Profitability and growth, they kind of unlock different types of valuations. So really the question for the RevOps leader is, what is it going to take? Like if I think about my next best action, what is the marginal cost and the marginal work to get another point of growth or another point of profitability? And how does that all interlink? And that's really the big question that we try to solve in RevOps every single day. This is what we're looking at all the time. And it is kind of the backbone to how I think about revenue.
Yeah.
Quick question for you, Jake. I see on the guidance, all this stuff makes total sense. Just curious, you have rep productivity, 1.2 million for enterprise, 800K for commercial. How do you define enterprise and commercial in those?
Well, another way to think, the first thing I'd say is you should be looking at something like 5x OTE. That might be a better way to put it. So like your minimum, kind of like the lower range here is 4.5 to 5 times the on-target earnings for a rep they should be booking. And that's what's getting you into like the realm of being able to be profitable and so forth. That said, yeah, enterprise, I mean, you're looking at deals at over 100K. 1 to 3,000 employees usually is what I'm seeing, depending on the organization and or whatever the metric is that's important to them. But really what we're talking about is 4.5 to 5 times on target earnings.
That makes sense.
Great.
Okay. And now just to kind of reiterate, like why we're all here, right, is to drive that growth that Jake was talking about. It's about winning and keeping revenue, not just chasing sales. So you really got to think about all the different places that you can impact in revenue operations and align those things, because there are so many interconnected and interrelated dependencies and decision factors that are really complicated. And by the way, like today, we're all operating with a lot of silos. We're operating in silos of people that report potentially to different leaders. We're dealing with silos where data is distributed across numerous different platforms. And ultimately, you need to connect all these dots in order to win the revenue and keep the revenue, both. Think to yourself, like, how easy or hard is this for you right now? How well are you doing these things? How connected are you? How can you connect things a little bit better? My quote from one of my favorite books is that the team that connects the most dots wins. This is hard, by the way. Let's acknowledge that. This is super hard, and this is why I think we're all here today trying to find out how we can do this a little bit better.
Yeah, and Stephanie, I'd say one thing to put out there is a lot of folks have been talking about connecting the dots in the top of the funnel. And then we've always been talking about connecting the dots in terms of renew and expand. But also have to connect the dots during the actual like initial sales process when you think about value creation, that your value prop, the content you're using, and how you're actually selling. I think that's just as important as those two ends, and something that sometimes gets missed.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings me to this concept of the growth guess gap that we're starting to lean into here and acknowledge that, a lot of what we're doing to try to grow and keep revenue is a guessing game. There are some really hard metrics. There are some really complex models and requires data from a lot of disparate places to gather effectively and to use effectively. So at the end of the day, a lot of teams will end up making assumptions on these things. And, that's okay because that's what we have to work with right now. But I think that this is a dangerous place to be if you're in growth guess gap world. And to me, this just starts to make it very clear as to, again, the complexity and the time involved in trying to pull all this stuff together to make it more factual. It's really hard. I mean, Jake, I think you've probably seen this in a few places. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it is hard. I'll give you a couple that we're seeing right now. The first, perhaps around sales capacity. It's interesting. In this current seat, we've had companies with sales capacity, which is really the quota that you've put on the street, like to a sales rep level against your plan, that have traditionally been at 70 to 80% of plan. And no surprise, they've really struggled to get to plan, even with sales reps hitting and attaining their numbers. When we asked about sales capacity and why it was so much lower than planned, the answer was that they kind of handed out quota, but they didn't think of things like attrition, ramp time, and so forth. We've also seen companies on the other end, like we're going to hand out 150%, make sure we have a ton of coverage, results in really expensive growth, a lot of reps not attaining really high dollar spend per booking, and so forth. Getting that right is important. Getting that right by segment and understanding what you need in a commercial space versus an enterprise space, or maybe a vertical versus another vertical is important. Right now, we're looking at this real time as the economy is in flux and everyone's a little uneasy and doesn't know what's going to happen with tariff impact or other types of impact. Where do you slow down hiring? Where do you keep hiring? Where are you ahead? Where are you behind? And you have to know like where you are right now by segment, by vertical, however your business is focused. You need to know like how attrition has impacted it and how a delay in hiring is going to impact your plan in the future based on ramp time and things like that. And that is when we ask those questions, most companies can't answer that in a timely manner. And that means you can't react to the economy. So that's something I'm seeing today that should be very straightforward with the right technology, but actually becomes a pretty complicated ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
And question, Jake, on that, or I guess, well, one thing I'll mention, I know I've been in that seat before of making guesses a lot, and you kind of go through this exercise of you got a plan or a target, you talk about how you're going to get there, these people that you got to hire,
Yeah.
then, you realize maybe later or after the fact that like, oh yeah, we've got these new people in the plan. Well, it actually takes time to hire them, right? I can't magically find a person and put them in a seat, say tomorrow, and start ramping them up. And there's also attrition. There's all these normal things that happen that you need to account for. And
Yes.
Jack actually asked a question on ramp time specifically right after we were on the last slide. Do you have
Mhm.
any benchmarks or recommendations on how to think about ramping reps? Like, how should people be thinking about that as it relates to their own business? And I know, like, one of the mistakes I've made in the past is you just make these assumptions. Actually, we're talking about the growth guess gap where it's like, oh, 90 days. It takes 90 days to ramp a new
Yeah.
rep. But
Yeah.
if you were to actually ask me why does it take 90 days? I would not be able to tell you. Like, I just say like, oh, I just assume 3 months, right? It's something easy to put in your plan,
Yeah.
0%, quota attainment in month one, 50% in month
Yeah.
two, and 75% in month three. Just, it works, right?
Yeah.
But like, how should people like Jack and others be thinking about the ramp time?
Yeah, so there's three things I think about when I'm thinking about ramp time. The first is you should know what it has been historically. The way that I've done that is looking at all new hires over the last 2 years and look at their production as a percentage of a fully ramped person's production. So not as a percentage of quota, because I don't know if the fully ramped folks are hitting or not hitting, but you just look at your data, compare your ramped people on 1, 3, 6, 9 months compared to a fully ramped average. At least then you'll know your historic, which is really important. Like that's the first thing. The second is if you can, and this is where it's going into kind of like these models, can you correlate that with pipeline entering? Whether those has had or did not have pipeline, and or the sources of pipeline, like how inbound is your business versus outbound. And the more inbound, the faster your ramp time is going to be. So basically know what's happened historically, figure out if there's a difference between like territories or whether it's more inbound or outbound focused, and use that data to go and adjust your model going forward. The third piece is like, well, can I make it better? And I think that is where you have to look at technology and best practices. And I think we could have a webinar just on onboarding and best practices in onboarding. The most important thing in my mind is getting teams to practice the pitch, to practice talking about the product, to get in front of their peers, customers, and so forth. And I do think the AI world where you can go practice with AI is really helpful. I think that's one of many ways to get people practice time. The other thing is onboarding has to be structured. It is better to be with your peers. Whenever I've done this analysis before, I've had better results if there was an in-person component versus not an in-person component. But the third thing is being really intentional in terms of what your onboarding program looks like and hold people to it. Last thing I'll say there is it sets the tone for your culture. Measure it, enable managers to talk to their employees about their stats as they come on board. And it actually teaches them that, like, well, my manager's asking me about my enablement. In 3 months, they're probably going to ask me about how much pipeline I produced last week and so forth. It begets culture, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those first impressions matter when someone becomes a customer. The first interactions they have with your customer success team, first impressions matter, right? That's their first impression of you as their solution partner and them as a customer. Same thing on the sales side. If you just hired someone, you're setting the tone for the culture and you can set them up for success, or you cannot devote the right amount of attention to it. You can keep it unstructured. You can let it be at will, self-serve, right? And like do all these things that can hinder their results going forward. So I like that. Makes a lot of sense.
Yep. And then, by the way, Michael, I saw your question around like a drop in net discover meetings. I think one, you gotta look at your sales capacity. Like at the end of the day, like you need the same capacity you had if you have less of those meetings. Two, really deep look into your ICP and into the folks that you're prospecting against, ensuring that your reps really are getting the data to make sure they're reaching out to the best possible prospects so they're using their time wisely. I think we have to get smarter and smarter about how basically talking to warm leads and using the right technology to figure out who they are, and also to use more automation to create warm leads to see if you can get that number back up. And then finally, are you seeing that drop everywhere? How strong is your data? Should you rethink your capacity model or your go-to-market plan based on that and based where the opportunity is? So those are all things that we would do and are doing as we see changes in demand.
Okay. Well, I think this slide really summarizes what you just said is that, in order to overcome a lot of the challenges that we face, like we have a lot going on. We have to manage all this complexity. We have to think strategically. We have to understand the interrelated components, be adaptable, understanding all the different instruments and all the ways in which that we can pull levers to get the results that we're looking for. There are so many variables to get to the desired outcomes. And so, figuring out what is the best way and what is the best thing to do in order to drive the outcome is really important. And just, pause for a moment and think about what this is like on a day-to-day basis. And, how hard or easy is it for you to do these things. And if you want to, let's say you want to analyze your ramp time, like how long is that going to take you to pull that together? What data do you need? Where do you have to go for that? What's the model you have to put together? Do you have resources that can do that for you? Are they educated in how to go about that process? Like there's a lot to do when you want to get stuff like this done. And so, I think about it. I love a good analogy. So I'm going to use this one where, in RevOps, we face major obstacles, right? Think of it as trying to climb over these mountains. We've got so much to deal with. Organizational misalignment. Marketing is over here and sales is over here and customer success is over here. Or, like I said before, there's disconnected data all over the place, and that's hard to bring together. And add on top of that resource constraints and revenue leaking out, and you don't know where that's happening, or you're not able to find where that's happening. And also, trying to manage this on spreadsheets right now is what many of us are doing. And this is a very inefficient and time consuming way to go about handling a lot of this that we're talking about today. But think about AI as kind of that plane that can fly you over the top of some of this complexity, right? That's the goal here, is that you want to be thinking about AI as to what is it going to smooth over for me, or what are the tasks that it's going to improve, or the things that it's going to automate for me so that I can affect change and do my job better, faster, with more intelligence and more precision. And so this is where we're going to kind of take the AI conversation now into, let's start to talk about how AI comes into play here. There's so many use cases for AI. I mean, this is endless and it's going to keep evolving. And so I just kind of wanted to think about a few of them, particularly ones that, xfactor.io is thinking about, and that align with the topic of this conversation about, how can AI, and in this case, growth AI, impact, what we're trying to accomplish. And so let me just start with, what is growth AI? Growth AI is the concept of using native AI technology that is fit for purpose of growing and managing revenue. So that can take a lot of different forms, but for example, that can be pulling a lot of these different interconnected and complex models together in a way that makes it very usable, that is real time. It can help you work with massive amounts of data quickly and efficiently, managing resource allocation, focusing on metrics that matter to revenue plans, ones that point directly to areas of revenue leakage or inefficient pipeline velocity or lead creation problems and opportunity gaps and things like that. You can rapidly simulate revenue outcomes and scenarios and just ultimately complete some of these tasks much faster than you could with traditional spreadsheets, analysis, or even BI tools. So, Jake, any thoughts on some of these items?
Yeah. I think the first thing is on that previous slide with the plane flying over the mountains. Just, I was just, when you said that, I was thinking back to a specific meeting I had my last company. And I remember it was with a couple analysts on my RevOps team. And I just remember us trying to do, I think it was some top of funnel work. And it was probably just a basic funnel and conversion and so forth. And I just remember how complicated it was to align everybody there and like translate the language from sales into ops into BI, like SQL form. Like that was a lot of friction. And then I remember how many competing priorities there were on the BI side because this, a lot of us, we don't have unlimited resources. So the BI team was like, hey, do I go create these metrics for a go-to-market team? Or do I do this product analysis that looked at product adoption for the product team? They're both pretty important. It's pretty hard to make those trade-offs. And like that was the world we're in. To get above all of that and into something like this, one, it really does matter because that's real. When I think about this slide, there's a couple things I call out. First, the value prop creation. We're kind of talking about deal cycle. I think right now that is teams either have separate value creation teams, sales engineers. You might need a high ratio sales engineer to AE to create these things. It's a lot of work. It's not that scaled. There's not enough people really figuring out like the best way to do it. having a better way to create the value propositions for your specific prospect for their specific use case that is like incredibly applicable to what they're doing, to then help populate that with the right numbers and the right statistics and so forth. I see that as something that reduces deal cycle time because it gets prospects more comfortable more quickly. I think that one is great. And then I would say beyond that, there's a whole piece around ICP and the ideal customer profile. And when I think about my past and some of our portfolio companies today, most of the time when folks say they understand their ICP, it's still at like this really high level. Like, yeah, we sell in to manufacturing companies between 1 and 4,000 people. Like that's kind of useful. But if you can get your ICP down to specific personas, to specific use cases, or even to like, well, it's those manufacturing companies, but it's really just the ones that are facing certain types of challenges. And if you can get your tech to understand more attributes about these companies and to build a tighter ICP, you can be way more proactive in terms of how you build your territories. So that ties into the territory piece here. You can be more proactive in working with marketing in terms of the content you're building. You can create better value propositions back to that. Ultimately, you can even feed into your customer success team to make sure they're proactively bringing up the things that we're hearing during sales cycles. So it kind of starts to feed into all of this. And then from that, you can create a better plan. Today, I don't see that happening. I think it's too hard to do ICP work. Usually you're like calling Bain or McKinsey, or you're taking your analyst off of something for 3 months. And the same with value prop. So again, that's something I see today that is wrought with friction that needs a better answer.
Yeah. So many use cases here that we could get into and probably have a webinar on each one. But let's kind of get into a little bit more, a double click down into AI and the different types of technologies that I think are going to really transform your ability to do the things that we've talked about so far. And I just want to kind of level set because I don't know how up to speed everyone is on some of the AI buzzwords and terminology that you hear out there. So I'm just going to give a quick, like a basics overview and break it down to basically three main categories of the types of AIs that are out there. There are software companies right now like Xfactor.io who are what we call AI native. And that is a software that is purposely built from the ground up using AI as a foundational architecture. And from there, able to then really be able to drive workflows, improve tasks, minimize complexity, and overall allow for a lot of different elements of AI to come into play to do different things to help with that task piece, but also decision making and things like that. Another category of AI are what we call AI embedded. So this is commonly where you've seen a software platform that's been around for a long time, a very established brand that, is a very trusted, vendor and, has a really strong use cases. And now they're starting to wrap some AI functionality around that existing software. And this does a lot of different things. It enables them to have new revenue streams. Think about Salesforce or Clary, adding different AI features into their software that's been around for decades. And so this is great for them. However, the downside of it is that, because these platforms were not built upon an AI foundational architecture, they may run into some limits of what they can do with AI. And so it may not have the full potential of working with data the way a native AI platform would. AI wash is kind of more for those, buzzwords and the marketing fluff that you hear where, there's some AI features in there, but it's pretty superficial and it really doesn't change how things get done, or it's not that transformative, and it can be a little deceiving as far as how valuable it really is. And so why is AI native important? Let's kind of dig into that even a little bit more. Because again, think about the, AI being the plane that's going to fly you somewhere. Like, you want it to do a bunch of different things. You want it to get you from point A to point B safely. You want it to be comfortable. You want it to show you a movie while you're on the plane or whatever. You want to be able to do a lot of different things. And so a native AI platform is going to allow you to have much more possibilities of what AI can do for you. When we're talking about growth AI in particular, some of the things that are very helpful for us as we're trying to manage all this complexity and think strategically and adapt and do all these things, we're going to need a lot of AI tools at our disposal. And so that's why native AI is so important. And so I'll just kind of go through these to give you a quick introduction of what these mean. Domain language models, like this is a purpose-built language model that is specifically trained for a particular industry. So this is accurate and contextually relevant information in a language model. So think about if you're an architect, you are not going to go ask ChatGPT how to build a house because it is not going to have the depth of knowledge and the expertise and the context relevant to building a house. It might give you a nice little plan there, but it's not going to help you build the house. You need a much more robust system that's going to tell you about building codes and all different kinds of engineering restrictions or whatever, what have you. And the same goes for growth, right? The same goes for running a revenue team, is that you don't want to rely on just the LLMs that are out there that aren't specifically tuned and trained for the particular use case. Agentic AI, we're hearing a ton about this right now. And this is incredibly important because this is the aspect of AI that can really get stuff done. And it can do that in a way that is very helpful to those of us who need an extra hand. So these having agentic AI are the things that can help you with decision making. It can go do something. It can go investigate information for you. It can analyze things and come back with recommendations. So having agentic AI is super important. And even multi-agentic AI is even better because then you have a bunch of different experts at your disposal that are trained on a specific task or job and knows how to do that job. Intelligent simulation, I love this so much because I think about how useful this is when you're thinking about trying to model different scenarios and figure out the best path of how to grow revenue or keep revenue. This is a way that you can work with a mass amount of data in real time to model and predict different outcomes using a lot of different variables. And so this allows teams to test strategies, do a lot of what if scenario planning, maybe make a few different options for growth plans, and have some really healthy conversations about what is the best plan to put into place before you put it into real world implementation. And what's really neat about this, and what I'm super excited about, is that in order to do this simulation effectively, in essence, what needs to happen is you need to build what we call a neural network of all the different interrelated plans and elements of a revenue engine, right? You have to know your capacity, you have to know your lead funnel, you have to know your pipeline metrics, and they all have to be kind of connected to each other so that if you pull one lever over here, it knows what the outcome is going to be over here. So these are purpose-built networks that are able to learn complex data patterns and enable you to kind of use them and play around with them in a way that really gives you lots of different options. And finally, multimodal AI is where it's not just text-based AI, like you ask a chat GPT a question and it gives you an answer back. Multimodal allows you to interact with different types of data, like charts and graphs, voice, emails, that type of thing, and transform that into actionable things. So you can ask a chat bot to investigate some aspect of your data and give me a chart back that plots it out on a scatter chart, let's say. It's important to be able to have those types of flexibility so that you can get the richest experience and the most detailed. Do we have any questions on this one? I know that was a lot. It was a bit of a 101 on growth AI technologies, but
I know Jack mentioned just in the comments about kind of how saturated agentic AI seems to be. So I don't know if you have any maybe feedback or thoughts on that, or how any of these different categories maybe are or are not
Yeah,
saturated at this
yeah.
point.
It's definitely saturated depending on the types of jobs that those agents are designed to do. And there's more saturation in certain jobs than in others. I see there's a lot of, and we're no different. We're looking at potentially a BDR agent to handle our interactions with people on our website and that type of thing, top of funnel. What you want to do is isolate down to, well, what is the job you really need to get done? What is the thing that you're looking for? And then figure out from there which one is the best one that's going to give you the biggest benefits or help you the most. They all have different capabilities. And I think you have to look behind just the buzzword of agentic. What is the job it's really going to do for me? And how is it going to go about doing that? And to what degree is that AI embedded or native or that type of thing?
Yeah, one thing I'd say to this, I'm not an expert in these things, and I think this does highlight why for RevOps, I think AI hasn't fulfilled its promises yet. I think that the domain language models, the intelligence simulation, and the multimodal AI in particular, are they're not really helping us, like as RevOps professionals. We're not getting to answers faster for our CRO or for our CEO. We're not able to run a bunch of different scenarios and spend more time thinking about what that might mean for our business. We're still like stuck in the data layer and creating data. And I think it's about time that we bring that technology is brought to market and that we have something where we can really be more intelligent about our business. And then I think on the agentic AI piece, one, I think there's also a lot of opportunities for agents to help more with like onboarding of product and service type things. If you think about products historically like Pendo, which is this very like linear, like I'm in the product. If you do something specific, it's going to pop up and say, here's the next best action. But it's just based on whatever the product team thought was best. What if we could be way more agnostic and the AI could figure out what you're trying to do and actually help you do your next best thing proactively? I think that would be a game changer in terms of supporting your onboarding experience. I also think there's a world where agents help RevOps again do some of these other activities we've been thinking about. So beyond just the SDR, call, email more people type agents.
Mhm. Yeah.
How do you, question for both of you, how do you think about, someone asked this question of kind of building and managing agents. So I'm just curious, how do you think about build versus buy as it relates to AI technology? And how should operators be thinking of that? Is this one more thing where, hey, we should, build and tinker and build a bunch of stuff for ourselves? We should buy products. Maybe you start building to see how you can solve a solution for yourself, and then you ultimately buy products. How do you all think of the build versus buy question as it relates to all the AI capabilities that are out there?
I've always thought about build versus buy. How hard is it to build? Do we have the expertise in-house? What are the trade-offs? And how hard is it going to be to maintain? And am I going to be able to keep up with the market? And the more you can be like, we've got the expertise in-house, the cost is relatively similar. And as it relates to upkeep, like not going to be the big issue because no one likes to maintain apps in-house. And I think that more of that means sometimes on the data layer and the work to build your database and get your data in good shape. More of that I see as in-house. I think some of this agentic stuff you can build in-house, especially for support and chat and things like that. I think when it gets into some of the things we've been talking about today and bringing all these cross-functional things together, there's no way to build that in-house. You really do need a purpose-built team thinking about it. Stephanie, any other thoughts there?
Yeah. That's a good segue into this topic of context is that, sure, you could maybe build something that gets a job done quickly before you can find a commercially available product to do that. But likelihood that if it's a good idea, there's probably a company out there that's working on it right now and is going to solve that problem in one way or another. But again, it's complicated, right? Because what we've talked about, growth is complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of factors involved. There's a lot of science and math and algorithms and projections that you need in order to really do all the things we talked about, scenarios and, evaluating different options and being adaptable and changing with the market shifts and things like that. And so looking at AI that has context for really what it is that you're trying to accomplish is important because it needs to understand your overall revenue cycle. It needs to know what your demand gen looks like, and then what does your customer expansion and retention look like? What does your churn look like? It needs to know where to go find data, like where are all the places stuff hides, and do you have a data warehouse for that, or can you use like API integrations for that? That's complicated in and of itself, is going out and finding all the data that's needed in order to have an effective AI solution that's going to do a lot of different tasks for you. And then finally, you want to be able to evaluate something that's going to help you do things and give you decision recommendations. It's one thing to help automate, but it's another to have good advice coming out of this. Like, here's what I found. Here are some suggestions on what you could do to mitigate this problem that you're having in your data pipeline, or whatever the case may be. I think context is really important when you're thinking about AI technologies, is like, what is it going to do? Where is it going to go? How is it working and putting all this stuff together for me? Because I think to the degree where all of this comes together, it makes it that much more effective and helpful as an AI tool. Building this would be hard, I think. Collective expertise of knowing all the interrelated components, understanding the math and the calculations behind everything, and also having expert recommendations on top of it. That's what makes AI a really good, or growth a really good use case for AI, because it needs all of these things.
Yeah, I like what you both mentioned. My point of view is that, you hear some people shouting from the rooftops about how every company is going to become a software company and they're just going to build their own stuff and products are ultimately going to go away. And I don't subscribe to that. I'm a big bias for action kind of person. And so the first thing I do, like you mentioned, Stephanie, before you go out and maybe find a commercially viable solution to help solve your problems, is like, well, what can I do today? Like if I have 2 hours to develop a solution to my problem, what can I do today? And pre-AI, it probably involved a lot of button clicking, maybe some spreadsheets, right? Manual processes and existing kind of tooling. Now, today, maybe it involves some basic agents that are doing some of that button clicking and moving stuff around, right? But like, that's not something that, at least right now, I'm going to be able to like scale and maintain. And I think about like all these horror stories I've heard of people who companies have gone down the path of like building their own CPQ because they thought they were like so special and unique. And everyone winds up hating that so incredibly much. And so I can't think of any examples where someone's actually wound up happier by building and maintaining their own thing. It seems like we all maybe think that we're unique and these problems we have are unique and we're a custom sort of business, but the truth is we're not. And a lot of other people have these problems. And I would much rather invest in someone building a product that solves all of those problems for all of those other people that have them as well, because they're going to have way more expertise than I do.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's not just a better dashboard or recreating what already exists. It really is that recommendations engine where you're bringing all that together. Like I think you said it well, Stephanie. It's the promise here is pushing what RevOps teams can do further than they could ever be before versus like, let's just go create what we've done, but faster or in an easier way.
So this is just a quick little snapshot to give you a glimpse of what a GrowthAI platform looks like from X Factor. This is our revenue operating center, and this is kind of the cockpit, if you want to think about it that way, of the airplane, which is giving you the weather and the pressure and the winds and the gas and your distance and all of that and your map. It's surfacing metrics that are relevant to the plan, what is going to be most impactful. So it has context around the plan that you're trying to achieve, and it calibrates all of the metrics around that to give you gaps and projections of where you might be deficient or where you might be overperforming. It was not just a dashboard, but there are mathematical calculations happening in here. Again, using some of the expertise and the domain knowledge about RevOps and how to think about these different aspects of pipeline and revenue. This is real-time data. It's, this one happens to be connected to a Salesforce database, but it's able to leverage existing data where it lives and turn that into very actionable real-time data that's calibrated and predictive in nature. Because what we all want to know is not just about what happened, but what is going to happen unless we do something differently. And then if we see that that's not going to get us to where we need to go, what do we do to change that? And so this is really that operating center for those types of decision making. And then, of course, we have our friend Mikey, the little baby with the glasses who acts like your agent, and you can ask Mikey questions and get recommendations and best practices, and also query your data and get information back that's relevant to whatever scenario it is that you're trying to figure out.
I love that this is correlating territory health to ramp time too, by the way. Like that's just an interesting thing that usually two separate conversations, but in something that we would then dig into as a
That's right. So, behind this dashboard is a whole plan that's, comprised of your capacity and your territories and your funnel and your marketing campaigns. And all of these things are woven together to help paint the bigger picture of like how everything is performing at any given time. Do the plans support the target? What might be lagging behind? And what can we do about it now in real time? And so, maybe it's just me, but I prefer to be operating with information and intelligence versus spending my time trying to work up a spreadsheet model that tries to figure out one of these things at a time. You know what I'm saying? Like, which is why I'm so excited about X Factor and why I work here is that there has got to be a better way. I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. Like, there's no way that I could spend 20 hours a week doing these spreadsheets and making very little headway and actually doing the things that really need to get done, making the decisions that need to get done, getting to answers more quickly, interpreting results, interpreting what's going on. Like, this is a perfect application for AI.
Yeah, I know I've sat there before in the past too, and I've kind of been like, am I crazy? Like, all the data is there, right? We're sitting on top of all of this stuff. Like, is it this hard for everybody else? And yeah, it turns out the answer is yes. Two quick questions, Stephanie, before we get into the last couple of slides for wrap up. Tony was asking if you have a HubSpot integration, and then we just had another question on if you're going to send out slides and content after the call.
Yes to HubSpot, and I believe we do send out the content after. So this is just us kind of leaving you with some words of wisdom here. And just to wrap up what we talked about is looking at AI, growth AI, and not just growth AI, but AI in general, as a RevOps force multiplier, right? We can be way more effective if we have the right tools and if we use technology in the best way possible. And we also can very much reduce the effort needed for these growth insights that we've talked about. This is a perfect application for AI, as we talked about. Let's get to the answers faster. Let's make decisions quicker. Let's be able to adapt and maneuver much faster based on various different shifts in the market or organizational changes or what have you. This is what is super helpful for managing all this complexity that we talked about, the big mountains that you have to climb over, and just overall helping you to rework the legacy revenue engine and have better insights into what's working and not working so that you can fix it. And ultimately, what this does is helps increase the value of the investments that you've already made in your data. You may have HubSpot or you may have Salesforce, and this just makes it that much more useful because, again, with the context that's wrapped around it, you can really, really start to use that very effectively. Anything that you guys would add?
I think it's a way to excel as a RevOps leader. It's a way to differentiate yourself to your peers. I think really going forth and grabbing this technology is going to be a good journey for all of us. That's probably the other piece I'd add.
Yeah, it'll let you work on the fun stuff, right? Free up to the fun stuff. Like, what do I do? What do we do based on what
Yeah.
all of our data is telling me? How do I execute, implement better? So
Yeah.
that's great. Well, Stephanie, Jake, thank you very much for dropping some knowledge and sharing. Everything that you did was super valuable. I know I learned a lot as well. And then to all the attendees out there, thank you very much for joining as well. But that's all I got for you. We'll see you all at the next one. Take it easy, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.